Welcome to the 3-0 show, part of the Athletic Baseball Show. It is Thursday, July 27th. Derek Van Riper, Saris Bergeroli, all here with you on this episode. We discuss the Angels, who have become buyers at this trade deadline. When we started making the rundown for today's show, we were working off a report that they were no longer interested in trading Shohei Ohtani. In the time since then, they made a big trade with the White Sox. So we're going to break that down. Got a small trade between the Dodgers and Guardians. Got a couple of reliever swaps and a lot of mailbag questions about the deadline to get to over the course of this show as well. But let's begin with the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim in action as we record. Part of a doubleheader they have with the Tigers on Thursday. Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo López are headed to Anaheim. They get an upgrade for the rotation. They get an upgrade for the bullpen. It cost them 2 of their top 5 prospects, with Edgar Caro, a catching prospect, and Kai Bush, a pitching prospect, going the other way, going back to the White Sox in this deal. We'll talk about the prospects a lot on the Friday episode with Keith Law. So, I'll throw this to you first. How much of an upgrade did the Angels get by adding Giolito and López in this deal?
Well, the Angels now have, for the rest of the season, the 4th best projected pitching staff. Starting staff with Ohtani, Giolito, Anderson, Sandoval, and Detmers doing the heavy lifting. So that has to move the needle a little bit. It is funny, though, because when you're talking about 2 months and you're talking about one player on a 26, and we're just focused on Giolito for a second. You're talking about one player on a 26-man roster. Like Lucas Giolito is worth about a win, says Fangraphs. And it's not even a full win because he's pushing, Griffin Canning further down. And Griffin Canning was worth, half a win before. So, the difference there is worth about a half a win. Look at somebody like Reynaldo López, who, even with him, the Angels have the 8th worst bullpen, according to Fangraphs again. But, it is interesting because Reynaldo López is an A reliever, and now they have Carlos Estevez and Reynaldo López and probably Matt Moore and Aaron Loup as their A bullpen, which is much better than their A bullpen used to be. And that's going to convert some games that were sort of 80-20 into wins, because they're going to use their A bullpen. And Giolito could, win a bunch of games. It's just that the projections say they improved their team by about 1 win. And that might mean everything. But it was also for a team that had a 15% chance of making the playoffs before the trade.
Yeah, this just feels like the beginning of what will likely be more trades for the Angels. You can't stop here. This is a huge step in the right direction.
Once you give up your top 2 prospects, why not give up the next 2?
Right, because the guys that were ranked ahead of them graduated. Well, I think if you're going to... Here's why I think it's the right direction. I think if you want to have any chance of re-upping Shohei Ohtani, you have to make the playoffs. So making an all-in push is based more on just getting there right now, as opposed to the longer-term view that a lot of teams take. So I think Perry Manassian is right, even though mathematically, 16.9% chance of making the playoffs entering play on Thursday. They win both games in doubleheader against the Tigers. I'm sure that'll jump up into the low 20 range or something like that. So, Britt, what else should they do to bolster this roster? Thinking about how each upgrade only makes a small mathematical impact, you have to make at least 1 to 2 more trades conceivably to really bridge the gap between the teams ahead of you and where you've been up to this point.
Yeah, first, I don't think this has anything to do with Perry. Do people think this is Perry? This reeks of Artie Moreno. I don't think any GM would sit here and say, let's not trade Shohei Ohtani, given where the Angels are right now. Right there, it feels a little bit like a house of cards. And I was just talking to someone about this before I got on this podcast. This trade to me reeks of desperation. As Eno said, you get 1 game and you get rid of your 2 best prospects. the White Sox, I mean, that's an absolute haul. If I'm the White Sox, I'm just like gleefully like, where do I sign before like somebody actually, wakes somebody up? I think if the Angels go to the wild card and lose, does that up their chances from 5% to 10% at keeping Ohtani? I guess unless they, and this is important because I covered the 2019 Nationals who had no business winning the World Series, and they did, unless they firmly believe, as long as they just get in, that they have a shot. And they do have a shot. We've seen crazy things. We saw the Phillies last year, who no one expected, go to the World Series. If they get to the World Series, I think that does have an impact on Ohtani and his like probability of signing with the Angels again. But if we're talking about a team that gets to the wild card and loses quickly, I don't think it does anything. So you're right, Derek. This has to be the first of many moves. I don't think this was the right move at all. I think they should have traded him. I think they should have taken a good hard look at the roster and realized, we can get back. I know Artie Moreno said in that Tom Verducci article, and yes, is there any question that was Artie Moreno in that Tom Verducci article, said we didn't get the return we wanted, which I find it hard to believe that teams were offering not their best prospects for Shohei Ohtani when the Angels offered their best prospects for Lucas Giolito and Reynaldo López. Right?
Well,
I mean,
the Angels' best prospects, though.
Yeah. Well, there's a relative thing going on there.
Zach Neto already graduated. Logan O'Hoppe already graduated. So their two best prospects entering the season were no longer prospect eligible. I mean, O'Hoppe's hurt right now. Neto's actually playing shortstop. So it's a weaker system in general. Giving up two of their top five is a lot different than giving up two of the top five in a really good system, right?
The Orioles, the Diamondbacks, these were the teams that were interested in Ohtani. So you can't tell me like, oh, they weren't going to, like, maybe it didn't
I'm saying
feel
that
like
the Orioles are not offering Jackson Holiday, the number one prospect in baseball, probably.
But they have guys at the big league level who are still considered prospects who are very good. They have too many infielders, right?
But I think like a young big leaguer is off the table too. So I bet you the best thing that they were looking at from Baltimore is, I guess, Joey Ortiz.
I don't know. Colton Cowser's keeps getting mentioned as a guy. I don't know if they'd be willing to move him, but they can't fit all these guys. They can't fit all these guys. So to me, the three untouchables for them are Rushman. Obviously, you can't really Rushman. They don't want to move Gunnar Henderson and then Jackson Holiday. Bryson Rodriguez, they're a little thin in pitching prospects, so maybe. But other than that, it's open season, and then they've got more prospects than they know what to do with. My point is, I don't think they were underwhelmed with Ohtani offers. I don't think they took it even far down the road at all. They were like, let us know. No one gives their best offer
It's also
10 days before the trade deadline.
It was the first. Yeah, it was the first volley of offers. It wasn't necessarily the best offer that each team was going to get.
So Artie Moreno didn't want to trade him. He made it very clear he didn't want to trade him. He said he didn't want to upset the fan base or whatever. He wants to continue to cash in on every game, and that's totally his right. But to me, this trade screamed desperation. And I don't think it's going to impact Ohtani going to be like, we played that one wild card series, so I'd rather sign here than New York or LA. Not happening unless they go to the World Series.
The team seems to be a little bit on the precipice. Like, it's a weird thing because let's say Ohtani leaves and they don't have their top two prospects next year and maybe even no more prospects. Are they any good next year?
No, they're a house of cards. That's what I said. Like, they don't have that foundation either. And Ohtani has been there. So what is their pitch?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think this is a desperation. Maybe they just think there's pain coming and the pain's going to be bad. So let's just lean into it and not think about tomorrow.
One last party, right? One last attempt to try and win before the band breaks up. You can't control it. So you might as well, because your franchise is below average in terms of overall quality and has been for the entire tenure of Artie Moreno's ownership. Accept that. And the best way to accept that is to say, this is our last chance, maybe in a long time. Now, the good news is Mike Trout will be back at some point this year. So that's one more boost to the roster.
I bet you sooner rather than later that stitches are out. And, the one thing with hamate bone injuries is it's usually a pain tolerance. And I think this is a guy that can tolerate pain.
Yeah. So you have that. There's a non-zero chance that O'Hoppe actually comes back before the end of the season from the labrum surgery too, which is really surprising.
Rendon is a total wild card. He could never play again this season, and it wouldn't surprise anyone, right? He's just had trouble staying on the field the whole time. But the thing that makes this so weird, though, guys, that I want to point out is that Artie Moreno was going to sell this team. He was totally out on them. And now he's like, yeah, you know what? Not only am I not selling this team, I'm going to go all in this year. It just is so confounding. Does he think that if they make the playoffs, that their valuation goes up? Like, no one's going to buy a team that's not going to have Shohei Ohtani that's going to crush your valuation.
He's going to make 10 times what he paid, if not more, regardless of when he sells. So I don't think it makes a big difference either way. Playoffs and no playoffs as far as what they're worth. But I'm surprised he didn't follow through on the decision to sell when it first came up. You don't usually have teams seemingly go up and then off the block like that as quickly as the Angels did. But we'll see if more moves are to come here between now and the deadline. August 1st, of course, is the deadline. We'll have a trade deadline special that day as well.
Another thing that's interesting to me is that, just zooming out, the Angels are a buyer. They've just declared themselves as a buyer. If the Angels are a buyer, then when it comes to other teams that have an equal chance or more of making the playoffs, that means there are 22 buyers and 8 sellers. That's why I think Carrera is a pretty good return for the White Sox, and it is interesting that it will be a seller's market. But even the White Sox, according to sourcing that I've got, is the White Sox have taken Dylan Cease off of the market, and they want to be competitive next year. So I don't think we'll see like a Juan Soto level trade. And I think that what we'll see instead are the, Michael Lorenzen rental from the Tigers. Maybe Scott Barlow off the Royals. I mean, I think it'll be kind of an underwhelming situation because the Angels signifying that they are buyers means there are 22 buyers. And there's just slim pickings on the teams like the Rockies. I mean, anybody can have Charlie Blackmon and Randall Grichuk if they want.
Well, yeah. What are the odds that a better starting pitcher than Lucas Giolito gets moved between now and the deadline? Since 2021, he's 17th league-wide in innings pitched. He's 37th out of 121 pitchers in K-minus BB percentage during that span. ERA's at the tick over 4. The whip's at 125. So it's more of like a mid-rotation level of results, but there's reason to believe that he's better than that because of the success he had from 2019 to 2021, right? When he's pitching well, he can be more of a frontline kind of guy. So perhaps he's a clear 2 behind Ohtani. But is there a better starting pitcher that's going to move? A lot of people are saying this deadline won't be any good if the Padres and Mets hold on to everybody, right? I mean, Blake Snell for the Padres, and then
they have similar percentage chance of making the playoffs as the Angels, is my point. And they're similarly built where they're like, you know what? Like, we're not built for the long haul yet, at least. So we're built more for, winning in the short term. So, yeah, I think that the closest is Marcus Stroman, but he's got a really weird situation because he's got an opt-out, and it's a little bit like Carlos Rodon with the Giants, where if I trade for you and then you get hurt and then you opt in, I've got a hurt pitcher for $20 million next year. Like, that's not exactly where I want to be. And then Marcus Stroman is a guy who makes contact. I'd said that he was a good deal, and someone. One exec reached out to me and was like, "I'm surprised you thought that it would be a good pick. Marcus Stroman would be a good pickup. Like, doesn't seem like your type. You're a stuffist. You're a strikeout guy." And I get it, but sinkers are performing a little better across the league this year. He's been doing fine, and I think he's definitively the second best starting pitcher that is likely to get moved. And I don't even know that he's going to get moved because of his whole contract situation.
And the Cubs are in a precarious spot. They've won 5 in a row as we tape this. Like, they're one of those teams, and the Mets and other teams are like this, the Padres, where every game they win, you're like, oh, all right, they could be buyers. And then every game they lose,
they have a higher percent chance of making the playoffs than the Angels.
It's like, oh, sellers, like we're living game to game here. And, you mentioned the White Sox, and I want to get to this because we asked for questions on Twitter and somebody did mention this. It's not really a question. Well, it is. It's a great big picture question, though. Like, why do they think they can compete next year? Everything about that operation screams burn it to the ground. They have failed rebuild, and this front office remains intact. And to me, it's just such a fascinating thing there that in this season, as Derek said, when you know you can get more as a seller, why not sell everything? Sell everything not nailed down, capitalize, and just be bad for a few years and bring it back, because what you have done just has been lackluster and has not worked and has been painful to watch. I have friends who are White Sox fans. It has been painful to watch for quite a while now. So I know they're in the Central. I know they feel like, it's a winnable division, but like the culture's bad. The whole thing is bad. Burn it down.
I think there's two answers to you on that one. And I think, you said that you weren't sure that it was Perry Minasian, doing this in Anaheim. I think that there is actually a Rick Hahn situation here in Chicago, which is that Rick Hahn is the, I think, second or third longest tenured GM in the big leagues. And he has nothing to show for it in terms of divisional titles, worlds, like playoff runs, like nothing to show for it. And so if he does the full rebuild, he has to go to his owner and say, I need 5 more years. Well, what have you done in the last 5 years, or what have you done in the last 10 years? So, there's a little bit of like, well, if I do a full rebuild, I'm in trouble. And then the second part, I think, and this is being a little bit more charitable to the leadership of the White Sox, is just that, I like Luis Robert Jr. I think that he can be, along with Vaughn, can be part of and Cease, that's a good 3-player core. Now it takes 26, to win, and
40 really.
Yeah, right. 40 really. And what you've got is, 3 and Eloy, 4. So you got 4, but I did do some research that said that 4 young players, or at least 3 young position players, is enough to consider a core. So they're telling themselves, okay, we got Vaughn, we got Robert, we've got Eloy. We just need to put the right pieces around them. And with Oscar Colas and, Andrew Benintendi and Tim Anderson, they're not great, but like if you in short-term deals and, could they be better next year? Tim Anderson just 2 years ago was good, So you could start telling yourself the story, like some of these guys can be better. Kopech can be better, blah, 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 blah. And then the division aspect, I think I can see how you, especially if it's in your best interest, you can tell yourself that they can be competitive next year.
So I'm going to break the fourth wall. I recorded the Friday episode with Keith Law earlier today, and the White Sox came up at the end of the episode, and I'm actually a little bit optimistic about them for next year because I don't think they're tearing it down enough to be horrible. I think they do have an owner that spends a little bit of money, so they will plug the holes via free agency, but they do have the same organizational flaws that the Angels do. And actually the Mets have had this for a long time too. What is it about the little sibling franchises in the big cities that have 2 teams where they're always like bigger spenders than small market teams, but they don't spend it very wisely. They don't develop players well enough across the
battle
board.
For the back page.
I don't know why these teams are all so similar in my mind, but they seem like they have a lot of the same characteristics. At least historically,
Poor
they have
player development.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is pretty fun with the White Sox is Colson Montgomery might be one of their best prospects in a long time, and he might actually get to the big leagues pretty quickly. So if you don't rip it all the way down and you keep Robert, which you should, you keep Eloy, you have Dylan Cease, you bring up Colson Montgomery next year, you got Andrew Vaughn and Berger and a few kind of like secondary pieces.
You can talk yourself into it.
In the Central, it can be good. It's more of the same. I think the thing you want to see if you're a fan of the White Sox is, probably a change in the front office. We're not a podcast that calls people to get fired, but this is a White Sox team that's had 2 general managers since the year 2000. And I think at least 2 of us were in high school back in 2000. So it's a long time ago. It was Kenny Williams, and now it's been Rick Hahn since 2013.
And they're still there. It's not like Kenny's gone.
Yeah.
Right. So I think something in the bigger organizational philosophy, where they invest, has to change. They've done well over the years in international free agency. They have not drafted particularly well. They're not a team that tends to find players on the scrap heap. So there are other areas where they have
starting
to get better.
pitchers very well, or pitchers in general.
No, they've always kind of,
which is the problem.
They've always taken prospects and willing to trade to try and fix their problems, but eventually there's just nothing left to trade, and that's more or less what they're in right now. Think about the Reds. Think about where the Reds were at when they had this sort of, we're in the middle. We've got some guys that other teams want. We could keep making runs at it. We're in the Central and the NL side, so maybe we can just keep it going. I thought they tore it down a year too early, but because they didn't wait until all of their players were in walk years, they got good returns back in those trades. They scouted well and did well as a front office.
Cease would get them so much, you know.
Yes.
That's why it's so tempting. And I think your biggest decisions internally when you're trading players and you're not ready to win right now, it comes down to your controllable pitching. I think that's the best asset you can take and use to get a lot back in the return. Like if you think the return for Giolito was underwhelming, I think you'd be overwhelmed by what teams would willingly give them for Dylan Cease with several years of control left. And that's more of a franchise-altering trade. But then, do you want the same front office that's been in place for the last 23
try and develop
years?
all those prospects.
No.
Do you want them to choose those players? And do you want them trying to develop those players? And I think White Sox fans would say, hell no, we want change. We want something different because there's no reason why we shouldn't be the best team in the AL Central on an annual basis based on market and based on the resources we should have. So they want a front office change. They want an ownership change. They want it all, and deservedly so, because they deserve a lot better than what they've had over the last 2 decades. Amazingly, there's a World Series title in there. Without that, I feel like the level of desperation for the franchise would be completely different.
Yeah, it's so fascinating though, because you bring up a good point that reminds me of the Nationals, who right now I wrote about this earlier this week. There's like a lot of contention and a lot of debate in that front office over how much to sell, right? Because at a certain point in time, Mike Rizzo is on an expiring contract. Davey Martinez as well, although, it's less his job as a manager. But if you trade a player like Lane Thomas, who's only 27 years old, he's not a free agent until 2026. Are you saying to fans, hey, we're not going to be good before then, right? Does it send that message? Or are you saying to yourselves, listen, we got Lane Thomas as a throw-in, right? He came when we gave away John Lester, who retired at the end of the season with the Cardinals. They're lucky this guy has performed to the caliber he has. Do you sell high on him and get some guys more in line with, the James Wood, who's really their top prospect
CJ
right now
Abrams
that they got, and CJ Abrams, and you got a guy who's a little bit younger so that you're all good at the same time. But Mike Rizzo may not oversee that rebuild, right? So it is such an interesting thing to know, as you both have, that the front office factors in here too. These people are human. They want to keep their jobs. It's very hard to sell a rebuild. And if you keep burning it to the ground, the Nats have traded star after star. If you're now trading that mid-level, no one's saying Lane Thomas is a star. You're really telling your fans, hey, tune us out for 5 more years and then come back. I mean, that is just, it's a hard message to sell.
I think they are a little more of a fast track rebuild with the Nationals right now because James Wood looks like the best all around player that got back in that trade. CJ Abrams is having a nice year. Mackenzie Gore is a key contributor in that rotation. I know Robert Hassel's stock has really fallen since the trade, but he's an early first rounder drafted out of high school, a guy that still has some time to turn it around in the minors. But when you look at their system, they just drafted Dylan Cruz. Just about everybody thought he was the best position player available in this draft class. He should be quick to the big leagues and an immediate impact guy. So if you get Cruz and Wood onto this roster in the next season and a half, which doesn't seem unrealistic, Brady House is coming too. That's 3 really good top-end prospects that are not that far away. You could start to look at this team and say, yeah, they're at least competitive again. They're at least a 500-plus sort of team, maybe a team that can hang around the wild card race, and they're not averse to spending when it's appropriate. We've seen them, at least under Rizzo, make those moves in free agency, extend some of their pitchers. I know it didn't work out with Steven Strasburg and Jordan Zimmerman, but they spent the money on Max Scherzer. They're not afraid to go out there and add when the time is right. So I think they're on a better track than a lot of the other teams that have spun the tires in the middle. As hard as it is to trade away a Juan Soto, right? I mean, that's not an easy thing to do as a GM, or to trade away a Trey Turner. Those are tough decisions to make. They seem to have done pretty well in those moves.
Yeah. But do you trade Lane Thomas though? Because what you're talking about is a group that maybe 2025, right? So is it
before they're like a serious playoff team, probably 2025.
Especially
I think you trade Lane Thomas.
At Tommy John. I think you do too.
I know part
Just
of the
get
game
more
is,
for these guys that had team control,
yeah, I
Yeah.
think if you wait it out with Lane Thomas, he could turn in a couple more seasons like this one, be a 3, maybe a 4-win player at his peak. That's a nice player. But that guy at age 29, age 30 is going to bring almost nothing back in a trade. So now is the time. I also don't think fans have got to the point with him where they, as much as they might like him as their best short-term player, I don't think it's nearly as impactful as hurtful to them as flipping Soto or Turner or the other guys they have traded in recent years.
Or a centerpiece that you got from Soto or Turner. Like it's not like they won't be connected to those other deals. It'll just be a guy who's been here for a couple of years, for a year and whatever. And it's like, it's not like, turning around trading CJ Abrams and being like, well, we got nothing, or trading. We were saying trading Gore. Like trading Gore is not going to happen because he was in one of those franchise changing deals. One thing that I can't find right now that is sort of fascinating to me. Do you remember how much? Remember how much of the money on some of those deals was deferred?
It was like the money on the Nats.
They're paying Scherzer and Strasburg for quite some time.
Right. There's some Bonilla-esque stuff going on with the Nats finances on those contracts.
Correct.
Yeah. And I think that, it doesn't show up when you go to like the contracts page because it isn't something that like figures into the luxury tax. And so it's not on the books in the same way, deferred money, I don't think. But Strasburg's paid $35 million a year for the next 4 years. That's a problematic enough as it is. But I do believe there's money that they're paying beyond that. That'll be a consideration. So I don't even know when they can get back up to full payroll status like they were when they were winning. Because you're going to always have to maybe, take 30, 40 million off the top. I think it is as much as 30, 40 million because they deferred Corbin, Strasburg, and Scherzer, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. If you look at their current payroll and you take those guys out, they're like Orioles level payroll. So it's a little deceiving, but you're right. And also I think the key though, is they have to get sold because it's my understanding that the ownership is basically writing personal checks right now. Like they are bleeding money. They need to, they've slowly started to resolve the mess and stuff, but they need to just change ownership. And then ownership can say, all right, these are the people we want in charge, right? Is it Rizzo and Davey? Is it someone else? And then you can bring in new people, maybe revamp that player development who still has kind of been lagging behind. And then you say, all right, what are we dealing with from a payroll perspective? I mean, we saw with the Mets how an ownership change can just totally change the direction of an organization. I think that the Nats need to figure out something in terms of who's really in control of this team for the next decade before they can actually ever make some forward progress.
We get some breaking news that just scrolled by on Twitter. Carlos Santana has been traded to the Brewers, so a move in the NL Central. The Brewers, we talked about this on Rates and Barrels, have been trotting out a lot of lower end players in the heart of their order recently because of all the injuries. Rowdy Tellez being down right now is the big one at first base. Santana, I think, is a way of making the lineup deeper. I don't think this is the big impact move where the Brewers can say, yeah, all right, fixed it, we're all set. But I do think this is a move that makes them a little better on the margins. It's not the kind of thing that you get that excited about. Johnny Severino, an international free agent they signed in their 2022 class, appears to be heading back to Pittsburgh as part of the deal. So if you're the Pirates, Santana's a guy that was only there on a 1-year deal anyway. You're getting a really young player back for a rental. Seems like a decent little return.
Santana's near the end of his career. He's got the worst hard hit rate of his career, the worst barrel rate of his career. He's basically, he's basically league average right now with the bat and no longer an asset with the glove. So this is a small deal.
Tell us how you really feel.
It's a small deal, but like you said, Milwaukee. We talked about this on Rates and Barrels. Milwaukee. Was it Andrew Monasterio?
Yep.
Sal Frelick. Who are the other 4 hitters that have been hitting out there?
Owen Miller has been in the cleanup spot recently. Yeah, it's
an upgrade on those guys probably.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is once Rowdy's back, when Rowdy's back, you're probably talking about Rowdy as the main first baseman, Santana as the primary DH, and a guy like Owen Miller plays a little bit less. That's the net impact of this move. So I don't know. More to come probably from the Brewers, but we've seen some other trades go down. How about the Dodgers-Guardians swap? How about this one?
Yeah.
Your problem for my problem. The Guardians have so many infielders, it made sense. Ahmed Rosario is on the move. He goes to the Dodgers in this deal. Noah Syndergaard, working his way back from injury right now, is actually going to Cleveland as part of this swap. So, Britt, what do you make of this trade? Let's start from the Cleveland side. Do you think this organization, like the Dodgers, has had a lot of success developing pitching, maybe fixing pitching in some cases? Do you think they can get anything out of Noah Syndergaard in the final 2 months, especially as they're kind of reeling for some innings with Shane Bieber going on the 60-day IL?
Well, first, I feel like I need to say something nice about Carlos Santana.
Not necessary.
Sorry.
He had one of the best home run celebrations of the year when he walked one off against the Brewers earlier this season. There, we said something nice about Carlos Santana. A league average bat's not bad. That's an upgrade for the Brewers. I'm here for it as like if he's their number 6 hitter in a playoff game, that means they probably made 2 other upgrades, and it's all good.
Yeah. Also, like to add a little more context, when Seattle obviously had him last year, and when I've been around Seattle a bunch this year, and people were like lamenting the fact that they never replaced his leadership role. And in Pittsburgh, what he really did almost immediately, especially with the younger Latin players, was kind of take them under his wing, show them this is how we do things. And, the Brewers aren't like a particularly young team, but I think when you are adding guys who maybe the stats don't super jump out at you, these are still really important qualities when you get to, a 7-game losing streak or, big moments in the playoffs. I mean, this is a guy who has played in big games before. He's been in a World Series. And so I think that matters too. So I just wanted to say, Carlos Santana, you have some value.
Yeah. So on the rankings, I think Britt values him the most. I'm kind of in the middle, and Eno's like, whatever, man, just a guy.
Eno's like, worst hard hit rate, worst this, worst that, below average glove, down in the bargain bin. No, I'm not saying it's an earth-shattering move by any means, but I'm saying sometimes there are stuff that doesn't show up directly in the stat line that can make a player a nice fit. I don't think that's why they acquired him, but to give a little bit more of a picture. Noah Syndergaard, can they get anything out of him? If anybody can, I feel like Cleveland is one of those like top 2-3 teams that you'd be like, all right, if he can't turn it around in Cleveland, is he kind of done, right? Is he kind of cooked? This to me seems like one of the last chances for Noah Syndergaard, or maybe the last chance to kind of turn things around. And you're right, it was definitely like a problem swap. The Dodgers have kind of made, they get Kike Hernandez, and they've kind of made like these tinier moves. And I think people are kind of like waiting to see if they make a big splash, or if they're just going to hold serve and wait for Ohtani, which has kind of been a little bit of what people think they're going to do. I kind of feel meh about this whole thing. I don't think we've really seen a big move. And I don't think, like Eno said, we're going to see a big move this year. I'm fine with this. I mean, the Guardians have a little, they had a lot of really young kids too. They're kind of like the Orioles in that they have so many young kids that it's a question of like, okay, where are the innings limits? If we go to the postseason, what are we going to do workload wise? 100%. Right. So that to me is why you go out and you get a Noah Syndergaard. That is why I floated Dallas Keuchel as a guy who the Orioles should look at. I mean, he was a Cy Young when he was in Houston under Michael Elias. They liked him a lot early in spring. He's pitched to,
he's still throwing, yeah.
He's throwing really well, down in AAA St. Louis. The Twins are probably not going to have a spot for him. And to me, that's an innings eater. You need a guy that, no, he's not going to go 8 innings, but he's going to allow you to take some of the innings away from those young guys. So I'm fine with this move from Cleveland's perspective.
Yeah, it's funny.
And the Dodgers.
The Dodgers clearly wanted to get some right-handers. Kike and Ahmed Rosario can both hit lefties. They listed Ahmed Rosario as an infielder, outfielder, and
barely played the outfield though, right? Like he's barely played the outfield.
Yeah, but I also just wanted to point out that by outs above average, baseball's advanced metric for defense, he's the worst defender in baseball, Ahmed Rosario. And so there's really
not an outfielder.
There's a really corollary there too, because Noah Syndergaard throws by Stuff Plus, my metric that looks at the physical characteristics of pitch. He throws the worst 4-seam fastball in baseball. And so you've really got my problem for your problem. I could see Syndergaard going out there and just throwing cutters and curveballs and changeups and just almost getting rid of the fastballs completely. there's a chance there for that. He does command the ball better than people expect for a guy that used to be a hard thrower. But I think Britt nailed it. It's really just I need a guy that I can play sometimes against lefties. Somewhere on the infield or the outfield. His defense probably won't cost me a ton in a short, the rest of the season like this. And the Guardians were like, well, we got a lot of kids coming up against their innings caps, and we're going to need somebody out there just to throw.
Yeah, I think this just bridges the gap back to Gavin Lux being the shortstop for the Dodgers in 2024, coming off the ACL injury. I think that's still the plan as they look to the future. And it does seem like they're really holding back a little bit right now with the plan of going all in, trying to get Shohei Ohtani in free agency.
They are up against the second apron of the luxury tax. And that's not something that registers so easily because we have to learn the rules every year, but they are over the first. But the second has like another, there's more cascading issues you have to deal with. So that was one reason why I expected if they'd been on Ohtani as a trade, they would have asked the Angels actually to pay it all down because they're right there at like 245 and like I think 248 or 250 is the next level up. And I don't think they want to go there because, you go from, kind of like 33% for every dollar you spend in the first apron, and then it's like 60%. So that means if they spend a bunch on Ohtani, they have to it's Ohtani plus 60%, if they want to get him. So they definitely, I think they're going to do small moves. I think a lot of this deadline is going to be smaller moves.
We'll see where they go for those small moves. Maybe it'll look like uninspiring moves on the surface, but you never know. The Dodgers can get a player, make a couple of adjustments, and it can pay off in a pretty big way. We had a mailbag question come in. This was from Pat on Twitter. Is there enough time for the likes of the Dodgers, Guardians, and Marlins to help Kike Hernandez, Noah Syndergaard, Jorge López, the players they've acquired? Because a lot of the players that were moved in those deals are guys that have had underwhelming years. They've underperformed to this point. So first to you, do you think you can tweak a player, fix a player in less than a half season?
I think you can do it pretty quickly with pitchers because you can see that Robert Stevenson went to the Rays midseason and 3 appearances in with the Rays, he had a completely new breaking ball, and it's like 2 ticks harder, doesn't go. It's more of a cutter type thing, but they obviously presented that to him. Now he's throwing that thing 60-70% of the time. He's not even throwing his 98-mile-an-hour fastball the same amount. He's like a totally different guy. So I think it's interesting though that Jorge López has completely lost his slider. And I think that's why the Twins were like, hey, he doesn't have his slider. He's missing a big weapon. Dylan Floro, by movements and shapes, they're like, hey, he's like a regular guy, and the guys that we're facing haven't seen his super turbo sinker the way that everybody that the Marlins are facing, they've seen it. So we're going to take this guy back as be a fresh looking arm to our opponents. I don't think they're going to change much. I think there is some onus on the Marlins to either get that slider back or find a way for Jorge López to be effective with just the curveball and change in the fastballs and just never throw that slider again. But there's been a radical change in Jorge López's slider that I don't know what happened, but I guess you could get it back, but it's just weird when you have a pitch and you totally lose it. That makes me a little bit worried.
Britt, what do you think about a team going back to the way the Dodgers did with Kike Hernandez too? Like that seems like a way to get a player comfortable again, or at least to go back to usage or roles that were more familiar.
That's the thing with hitters, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And then like coaches lots of times play parts in things, there's been a lot of talk about Juan Soto and how do you fix him? And I think a big part of how you fix him is you put him back with Kevin Long, who was the only hitting coach that he ever had for years and years and years, who really is like a pseudo dad type. So I think that is huge. The familiarity. There's a lot of things that factor in, and what that guy's going to bring, how he's going to fit in the clubhouse. You kind of like, you saw, did you guys see this? His return where he danced in the dugout, that there are some guys that just fit in with the team, and it's clear that he does. So I'm really interested to see if he has better stats than he did in Boston, which, by the way, I feel like we don't talk about very much because they're like a team that lives in the in-between. But you could make the case that there's like 3 or 4 guys who it's like a huge trade deadline for, and I think Chaim Bloom's one of them.
Yeah, so they would be one of the teams that they have much better playoff odds, at least entering the day, than the Angels at 34.4%, a tick ahead of the Yankees, but clearly behind the other three teams in the AL East. Rays, Jays, and Orioles all up above 70% playoff odds according to Fangraphs right now. It seems like everyone's getting frustrated in Boston based on how people react to the Red Sox. You'd think they're five to 10 games below 500, but they're 8 above 500. They're not a bad team. So if we're talking about a deadline where it's a lot of smaller players on the move, or perhaps teams trading controllable players with each other, right? We've talked so much about teams like the Marlins and Orioles having a good match, one needing position players, one needing pitching, and those trades are hard to predict. It's the rental market that's easier to predict, but if that group's underwhelming, it means that anybody can go out and make the moves. The Red Sox could get anybody that they want. If they wanted to add pitching, they could easily get Michael Lorenzen, because who can't, right? You're not mortgaging your future, and you're getting some innings, and you're taking some weaknesses on that roster. If you were going to fix the Red Sox, what would be your first thing you want to fix, or what two things would you want to fix? I mean, there's some optimism that Trevor Story is coming back soon, so that's a nice lift for that roster, but you can't only rely on that. You need to do a couple other things, don't you?
I mean, I think the offense is actually pretty decent. Yeah, Tristan Casas is going now. Jarren Duran looks like a real piece, and Masataka Yoshida, like they've got a lineup that works. I'm just always worried about their pitching in Boston. And, I just did this mound piece, and people were all saying that they hated the Boston mound. And I think it's partially just because the Green Monster is just looming over your shoulder, and it's a place that plays, for offense. But with Whitlock, Sale, Cutter Crawford, Bayo, those, and Paxton, they're all either injury concerns, currently injured, or they're all like this. They're not, none of them are like mid-career veterans that are studs. They're all just either totally green and trying to figure it out, or really old and hurt, or maybe hurt soon. So, it would be interesting, I think, to add a stable piece to that, because you've seen Nick Pivetta is really blossoming in this role where he's got an opener. And maybe Whitlock could find some of his velocity if you only ask for 3 innings out of him. And I think that Michael Lorenzen actually would fit this one really well, because he's a guy who's relieved and he started before. And, you pair him with Cutter Crawford and Garrett Whitlock, and you say, these 3 guys will give us 2 starts, in our rotation every turn through. I don't know how we figure it out, but if we need basically 12 innings from these guys every five days, we can do it with these 3 guys.
And Chris Sale comes back eventually, right? I mean, you're talking about a guy that was actually pitching really well before he got hurt. A 2.25 ERA, 0.83 WHIP in those last 6 starts.
The story's close. I mean, they've got all the we brought Trevor Story back as our big trade deadline acquisition stories all queued up.
No, it does not count. It's good. It helps you. It makes your team better, but it does not count. You have
so
to do something.
The Yankees are going to get Aaron Judge as their big trade deadline acquisition.
The rage. If they do nothing, the rage would be off the charts. And we actually had a question from James on Twitter. If the Yankees become sellers, what do you think they could reasonably get for players like Luis Severino, Harrison Bader, Domingo Germán? Gleyber Torres is part of the question as well. I don't know what it is about Yankees fans. I don't know if this is James
and wanting to trade Gleyber Torres.
Why don't Yankees fans like Gleyber Torres? He's under club control for another year, so they've got him through next season.
He would be the one that would return them the most, I think.
So maybe that's why some Yankees fans want to trade him, but there are some Yankees fans who just think he's not good. Yeah. I think it's because they expected a superstar, and they've got a very good player instead.
Yeah. Severino would be interesting, though, because he's got such a high ceiling, people believe. Like, as long as you can keep him healthy, maybe teams would be like, yeah, I think we, here's the thing, though. I mean, it's a good question. I just don't, they'd get a lot because there's not a whole lot of teams selling, but I just don't think that there's any way the Yankees are going to sell. Not with Aaron Judge coming back, and not with where they're at, and not with a fan base is already starved.
Yeah.
They haven't won since 2009, right?
Yeah, but also 6 straight playoff appearances. So, you want to keep that string going so that if anybody says, oh, you haven't won a title in however long. You say, well, we have gone to the playoffs for 7 straight years, and what you need to do is get to the playoffs before you win a title. So
yeah, I mean that's not enough for Yankees fans, but yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're gonna sell. I do think they're gonna buy, and I think Cody Bellinger's an interesting name, though. If the Cubs keep winning, do they hold on to him? Right? Brendan Cuddy had a great piece today about how he thinks they're going to be tentative buyers, and I think that's probably the most likely avenue, especially because they think they're getting back to full strength here, even though we're not sure what Judge is going to get or what Judge you're going to see, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. How full strength.
Yeah, but I think they could get some decent things here. But listen, it's not like they're going to sit out there and be like, who wants Garrett Cole, right? Like that's not going to happen. Those would be the pieces that would get them a lot. I often wonder this. Do you think that they would be fine if somebody absorbed Stan's contract if they just took him and as long as they paid him?
Just like waived him and saw somebody picked him up.
Yeah. Because of the payroll, it frees up. And he's good in stretches.
Yeah,
but he's never been what they thought he was going to be.
$25 million. I think he's a millstone, actually, considering that he doesn't give you defensive value. I think it's a millstone contract. So you'd actually, if you want someone to take the money off, you'd have to give them a prospect, maybe.
Yeah, and you've got him through 2027, a club option for 2028. I think we can safely say that will not be picked up, no matter what Giancarlo Stanton does between now and then. Still hits the ball really hard. Needs to stay healthy, of course. Hasn't been healthy for most of this season. But man, you talk about the players in this roster that if they just did what they were supposed to do by projections, it would make a huge difference. Rest of season projections for Giancarlo Stanton.
Still good.
254, 335, 521 with 12 homers in 41 games. Yankees fans want that. Do it.
Yeah.
Do that. That will help you. That will increase those playoff odds if you could do it. Of all the players the Yankees could move, Glaber would get the most back in return if they did become sellers. Luis Severino is having a brutal season in a walk year, no less. This is the last year of the extension he signed a while back. It was a 5-year extension. I don't know where the strikeouts have gone. The home run rate has gone through the roof. I wonder if Eno's mentioned pitch tipping and teams finding things on Hawkeye. I'm wondering if it's something along those lines, because in my mind, when I see Severino, I look at the underlying numbers, look at the model, I don't see enough to explain how you go from being as good as he's been for most of his career to being this bad this quickly. The stuff hasn't backed up the way Noah Syndergaard's stuff has fallen off, right? This is a very different situation. And now we're talking about Severino as a guy that, okay, if you're the Yankees, there's a few decisions you have to make. Are you trading with the deadline? If you don't trade him, are you giving him a qualifying offer? Because
yes,
I believe in him. I would actually give Severino a multi-year deal, especially if he didn't have a qualifying offer on him from the Yankees. He makes sense to me as a buy low target for other teams this winter.
And in fact, you've sort of come along to a reason. One of the reasons I don't think the trade deadline will be as amazing is because of the qualifying offer, because I do think that like Jordan Montgomery is somebody I would give the qualifying offer to. Not necessarily that I would give him $19 million a season for perpetuity, but it's $19 million for one season. And it's for a Cardinals team that has like no starters under contract for next year other than Miles Michaelis. So yeah, I would give Jordan Montgomery the qualifying offer. I'd give Luis Severino the qualifying offer. I'm sure there's a name that's not coming right. Like if Marcus Stroman was a total free agent, I'd give him the qualifying offer. So I do believe the qualifying offer will take players off of this market because you get the chance of being competitive next year, which everybody says they want to do. They want to be competitive next year. And then B, you have a player on a short-term deal, high money, which is a lot of teams want to do that. They would much rather give you a lot of money for a short term than a lot of money for a long term and be stuck on that. And then lastly, you still get a pick out of it. And so I remember back to the CBA, they said, we will get rid of the qualifying offer if we do an international draft. And it turned out the details of the international draft were so odious, I'm assuming, or just, they couldn't get to an agreement is another way of saying it. But they didn't come to an agreement. The international draft didn't happen. And so the qualifying offer is still out there. And I think it's going to put its finger on this trade deadline and next year's free agency before the end of things.
One more player for the Yankees in that cluster with a qualifying offer question. Would you give Harrison Bader a qualifying offer? Potential Gold Glove center fielder. So,
yeah.
I mean, 1 year.
But he might take it. You got to be prepared for them to take it, right?
Yeah. So you offer it because you are totally fine having him for another year at that price. I would think the Yankees consider doing that because he was part of the trade.
He might be the best of center field defender in baseball right now.
Yeah. So you have that as a floor, and you get another year to work with him and see if you can put the best parts of his offensive profile together. It seems like it's never all happened at once. Earlier in his career, that power speed combo came with a lot of swing and miss, but he was walking a lot. Now he strikes out less, but he also walks less. So it's kind of a lower average, really low OBP profile with the good defense. And it's kind of like, hey, he kind of looks like Michael Taylor now, but the ceiling just a few years ago looked like it was a lot higher than that. So do you want to run it back one more time with Bader? I think that's another thing that the Yankees have to think about.
Career high in plate appearances came in 2018. It was 427. I think that's a no for me because of also the Yankees' difficulty with depth and the Yankees' difficulty with injuries really over the last few years. I'd much rather, maybe sign somebody that I thought maybe sign Bellinger, with something with a deal that starts with 18 million or 19 million a year, right? Well, why couldn't I give 5 and 100 to Bellinger or something?
You could consider that. But you also do have Everson Pereira and Jason Dominguez coming up soon. So maybe that's the other reason to say, let's go shorter term with Bader or not do the qualifying offer at all and play a stopgap game because both Pereira and Dominguez should be in the big leagues together. Yeah, by 2025, they should both be there. They could both be there next year, and it wouldn't be that much of a surprise because we could see Pereira even before the end of this season. That wouldn't be out of the question. But yeah, Yankees, one of those teams that playoff odds aren't terrible. They're just underwhelming compared to the lofty expectations. Bo Knows wants to know if Farhan should trade for a star or continue to do his thing. I made that question.
You didn't answer the real question.
You made that question nicer.
I made that question nicer.
I thought it was incredible.
Okay, here's the original question as it was tweeted. Should the Giants try and trade for a star so Britt can name one of their players, or should Farhan continue to do his thing and bring in guys that are good but not recognizable to baseball journalists?
Incredible question, first of all. Second, I think he should continue to bring in people that I have to Google, like the two guys that came from the Rockies. The Braves made those moves. Like, I'm not ashamed to admit, there's 700 players in the big leagues at once. It's an incredible amount to try to keep track of. The Rockies, some of these teams just fall through the cracks. How many Rockies can you guys name?
Yeah.
Well, we're fantasy people, so it's not really, we're not normal.
Something we have to do a little bit more of, but
that's true.
I mean, but I think it actually speaks to a difficulty for the Giants, which is you have all these pieces in order to move one of them off. And in order for what you have to do is the player you're acquiring has to be good enough for you to drop someone off of your 26-man roster and maybe drop someone off your 40-man that you, and the Giants seem to jealously regard anybody. So like, I think David VR is someone you could drop off the 40-man. I don't think he's going to be a great major leaguer. And so you can drop him off that. So, you could put Casey Schmidt in the minor leagues, drop David VR off the 40-man roster. That gives you a spot that you can play with. But everywhere, the Giants are credible everywhere with their mix and match routine, that what you are bringing in has to be clearly above that. And that's something I was struggling with. I was looking at Tim Anderson. I was looking at Paul DeYoung for them because they're projected the worst at short and center going forward. But I'm not even sure now that they have Marco Luciano up and Brandon Crawford coming back and Tyro Estrada coming back at some point. Am I 100% sure that Tim Anderson or Paul DeYoung is like an upgrade and somebody that they'd play much more than just against lefties? I'm not even sure. And then conversely, like on the star side, I don't see a star player that they need to put into this lineup. I mean, I guess that's why they're poking around Justin Verlander, because he's enough of a star that you would be like, okay, we'll make the roster spot for you and you will push somebody out of the rotation, and that'd be great. But, I don't think they want to do a Chris Bryant reprise, just to name a star that ends up not actually, contributing as much as they thought.
Fair. I think they do. They do have a need to upgrade, but the deadline for the Giants is probably going to look like other recent deadlines where it's their type of player, the versatile upgrades that just make them better around the margins. That's just the way that team has operated for a long time. I'm really curious to see what Luciano does because they did bring him up to the big leagues really quickly.
Hit a ball hard in his first at bat and didn't look at many pitches. Swung at his first pitch and drove it to the wall.
Just wanted to get those nerves down, probably. Question from average Chris Taylor hater. How will the Brewers trade deadline disappoint Derek again? It won't. You're not going to bring me down a few days before the trade deadline. Can't even believe you tried that. Drew wants to know, beyond Charlie Blackmon, what other marginal outfielders could be available for upgrades in Atlanta? And this could really be for any team because there's plenty of teams that could use a little help in the corners.
Marginal help. Yeah. I loved your story, by the way. If people haven't read it, they should. Had like if you're not shopping for the real thing, here's some like off-brand players you could acquire.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when I'm at the store and I'm like, do I need these like $7 chocolate chips because they're name brand, or should I spend $3 on the other kind?
Yeah.
If they are the organics brand from Safeway, they're pretty good, I've learned.
Oh,
no longer part of my life, though. So and like 3,000 miles away from you, Britt. Sorry.
One thing that has helped me is Jim Bowden's trade deadline cheat sheet. Just because he's and I don't agree with all the names on here. I think there's plenty of names on here that are not actually available. But he put out like sort of a generally regarded list of available players. For in the outfield section, I think they want a left-hander. They've been better against right-handers than they've been better against left-handers than right-handers so far this season. So I think they want a left-hander, but I don't know. Seth Brown, if they want a right-hander, then there's more. There's Mark Canha, Tommy Pham, and Randall Grichuk, maybe even Teoscar Hernandez. But from the left, I think you're looking at Seth Brown, Cody Bellinger. That's at the top of the market. So you were asking for a smaller deal. Jurickson Profar.
Profar could be an answer. I'm surprised at how much Eddie Rosario, he's got a reverse split right now. He just has not been that good against righties. 235, 288, 439 so far. About 9% below league average.
Player though, so I'm not saying I don't think you drop him off the roster, but I think getting another player that you could get into the mix with Eddie Rosario might be interesting. You know what I mean? Like because you could just keep Rosario on the thing and then have one of those postseason tears like he's had before.
Yeah, I guess I would also advise against taking a reverse split for 1 year, a half season, partial season, and reading too much into that. We've talked about Ramon Laureano in Oakland as kind of a mystery box. Like, yeah, there's years of club control left, but he's getting old. Like, what are they going to get back in a trade?
The A's. They're not even right. He's not even playing every day for the A's.
What would it look like if he was on a good team and didn't have to play every day? Would he get back to the per game production we saw just a couple of years ago?
His projections are good.
Fit. Yeah.
He's projected to be 10 to 15% better than league average.
I think that would be a pretty nice move for any team looking for an
as
outfielder.
Long as the price isn't high, because it's all like this team control aspect where it's like, oh, well, if the A's are asking me, but the A's can't ask me for a lot because he has team control if they're not even playing him every day. So they're like, oh, yeah, you guys care about the years of team control. You're not even playing him every day. Just give him to me. I would definitely inquire about Ramon Laureano, especially since he's one of the few veteran outfielders that's not a total zero on defense, and that you might be able to still stick in center, not necessarily every day, but somebody who could play a little center for you.
So we had a lot of great questions come in. We appreciate all of those. We'll try to take mailbag questions in future weeks too, because we want to talk about the things that you, the listeners, are interested in hearing us talk about. So be sure to send those our way on Twitter for future shows. I think people have been wondering if it's going to be a dud deadline or not. You've made some suggestions that it could be. And I think Britt weeks ago suggested that the deadline needs to be moved back because of expanded playoffs. If we had 2 more weeks, I think that would help, because some of these teams in the 30% range and below would either move up a little bit or they'd fall. And then some of the teams that are low would fall even further, and you'd have a clear line between the buyers and sellers. So I think that would make a lot of sense. But I will leave we'll leave everybody with one other idea to kick around. What about rapid expansion? What about 2 more teams, right? If you get the league up to 32 teams, a smaller percentage of teams ends up in the postseason. You might have a couple more sellers, even if you don't move the deadline back. You could keep the A's in Oakland, let John Fisher go do his stupid thing in Las Vegas, add a team to Nashville. You got 32.
Do that weird thing that they did Luria and the Marlins and the Nationals and stuff and the Expos where somehow John Fisher ends up with a team in Vegas, but the A's stay in Oakland. I would love for MLB to be like, look at my hands, and then ta-da!
Yeah, basically Rob Manfred, you got the extension, intervene here, do something good. Take this time that you've been given by the owners, this extra, 6 more years of Manfred. Is that what we're looking at? Do something good like that. Oh, and this makes the owners money because the expansion fee is probably going to be north of $2 billion. So you add 2 new teams, you're adding $4 billion to the coffers, even splitting that 30 ways. It's like $150 million per team, which is good in the face of RSNs collapsing. That's it. Big thought on the way out the door. Don't have time to expand on it much now. That's going to do it for this episode of the 3-0 Show. You can find us on Twitter. Britt is at Britt_Giroli. Eno's at Eno Saris. I am at Derek Van Riper. The Athletic Baseball Show returns on Friday.
You always got the green light here.